Hello there, and welcome to Before Law, where we step quietly into questions that echo across time and wonder, takes precedence over certainty. Tonight, we're not exploring distant galaxies or diving into the mechanics of evolution. Instead, we're settling into something that feels both intimate and impossibly vast. A question that has whispered itself into human consciousness since the very first moment we looked up at stars and wondered not just what they were, but whether they might be looking back. What if we were placed here? Not born from the slow accidents of chemistry and chance. Not the random product of cosmic dice rolling across billions of years. But intentionally positioned on this particular world, at this particular moment, for reasons we're only beginning to glimpse. Before we begin, I'm curious about something simple but grounding. Where are you right now as you listen to this? Maybe you're tucked into bed, letting your mind wander before sleep. Perhaps you're walking somewhere, the rhythm of your steps matching the rhythm of these thoughts. Or maybe you found a quiet corner during your day, stealing a few minutes to let deeper questions surface. Whatever your setting, you're part of this exploration simply by being here, by choosing to lean into mystery rather than away from it. And if this kind of gentle questioning speaks to you, if you find comfort in approaching the unknown with patience rather than urgency, I'd be grateful if you considered subscribing. It helps these quiet conversations find others who might also want to pause, to wonder, to sit with ideas that don't demand immediate answers. So let's ease into this together. Picture yourself standing outside on one of those crystalline nights when the sky feels impossibly deep. Stars scattered like ancient punctuation marks across the darkness. The moon hanging there with its familiar, patient glow. In that stillness, surrounded by the vast machinery of the cosmos, it becomes almost impossible not to wonder about your place in all of it. Why here? Why now? Why you? The thought that we might have been placed here deliberately carries with it a peculiar mixture of emotions. There's comfort in the idea that our existence isn't accidental, that perhaps there's intention behind the intricate dance of circumstances that brought us into being. But there's also something unsettling about it, because if we were placed here, then someone or something did the placing, and that opens doorways to questions we're not sure we're ready to walk through. Our conventional story usually begins with the familiar rhythms of science, evolution painting its careful brushstrokes across millions of years, natural selection testing and refining, mutations building upon mutations until complexity emerges from simplicity. It's a story that makes sense, that follows evidence, that explains the gradual unfolding of life from single cells to the remarkable diversity we see today. But even within that well-documented narrative, there are moments that feel less like gradual steps and more like sudden leaps. For hundreds of thousands of years, our ancestors crafted the same simple stone tools. The archaeological record shows an almost stubborn consistency. Then, in what amounts to a heartbeat in geological time. Something extraordinary happened. Art bloomed across cave walls. Language crystallized. Culture exploded into being. Symbols, rituals, music and stories appeared almost as if someone had reached down and turned a switch. Scientists call this the cognitive revolution. And it remains one of the great puzzles of human development. Why did our minds expand so suddenly? What triggered the burst of symbolic thinking that separates us so dramatically from every other species on Earth? The leap feels almost too dramatic, too coordinated to fit comfortably within the slow, grinding patience of natural selection. This isn't the only place where the human story takes unexpected turns. Ancient cultures across the globe, separated by vast oceans and mountain ranges, told remarkably similar stories about their origins. The Sumerians spoke of beings called the Anunnaki, who descended from the heavens to guide early civilization. The Dogon people of West Africa preserved intricate knowledge about the star Sirius, details that wouldn't be confirmed by modern astronomy for centuries. Native American traditions describe star people who came from above to share wisdom. Biblical accounts begin with humanity being created and placed in a prepared garden. When you set these stories side by side, scattered across continents and millennia, a pattern begins to emerge. These weren't cultures imagining themselves as slowly evolving from their surroundings. They consistently described being shaped, guided, or directly placed by intelligences from elsewhere. Were these simply attempts to explain the mysterious? Or were they preserving, however dimly, memories of something that actually occurred? And then there's Earth itself. We often call it the Goldilocks planet. Not too hot, not too cold, but just right. The more we study our world, the more remarkable this balance appears. Oxygen levels that perfectly match our lungs. An atmosphere that shields us from radiation while letting sunlight through. A magnetic field that protects us from solar storms. Liquid water covering the surface in just the right proportions. A moon that stabilizes our planet's tilt and creates the tides that may have been essential for life's emergence. Each of these conditions is extraordinary on its own. Together, they form something so precisely calibrated for our survival that it sometimes feels less like coincidence and more like preparation. Skeptics remind us that we evolved here, so naturally we fit the conditions. But the question lingers. Is it really just chance that everything aligns so perfectly? When you compare Earth to its neighbours, the uniqueness becomes even more striking. Mars, cold and dry, with barely a whisper of atmosphere. Venus, a greenhouse inferno, hot enough to melt. Lead. Mercury, scorched on one side and frozen on the other. The outer planets are gas giants with no solid ground to stand on. Even the most promising moons would be deeply hostile to us without extreme technology. Earth stands alone as the exception, the rare jewel that seems uniquely prepared to host not just life, but life that can contemplate its own existence. It, almost as if someone surveyed the possibilities and selected this world specifically for what we would become. If you were an intelligence capable of seeding life across the cosmos, wouldn't you choose exactly this kind of planet? If you wanted to place beings somewhere they could flourish and grow and eventually ask questions about their origins, wouldn't Earth be the obvious selection? This line of thinking naturally leads us to consider who might have done such placing. The possibilities stretch in multiple directions, each carrying its own implications. Perhaps it was extraterrestrial intelligence, civilizations that arose billions of years before us, and decided to plant seeds of life wherever conditions allowed. Maybe they saw themselves as cosmic gardeners, spreading consciousness throughout the universe as an act of preservation or curiosity or simple generosity. Or perhaps the placement was more intimate than that. What if it wasn't aliens from distant stars, but humans from the distant future? If time is more flexible than we imagine, if the laws of physics permit some form of temporal manipulation, then our descendants might have reached back to ensure their own origins. They might have shaped their past, placed themselves in history, creating a loop where cause and effect circle back on each other in ways that bend our understanding of linear time. There, also the possibility that the placement was divine, that the intelligences responsible exist on scales and in dimensions we can barely comprehend. Not necessarily gods in the traditional sense, but consciousnesses so vast that they operate according to principles we haven't yet discovered. In this view, placement becomes less about technology and more about the fundamental nature of existence itself. But perhaps the most intriguing possibility is that placement doesn't require any external intelligence at all. What if the universe itself has built-in tendencies toward complexity, toward consciousness, toward the kind of questioning awareness we experience? Some scientists and philosophers suggest that the cosmos might be structured in ways that naturally give rise to intelligence. that consciousness isn't an accident, but an inevitable flowering of cosmic processes we don't yet understand. Each of these possibilities reframes our relationship with existence in profound ways. If we were placed by extraterrestrials, then we're part of a larger community of minds scattered across the galaxy. If we were placed by future humans, then our story is a loop, our destiny somehow already written. If we were placed by divine intelligence, then our existence carries purpose beyond our current understanding. And if we were placed by the universe itself, then consciousness is not rare but fundamental, woven into the very fabric of reality. The question of placement also changes how we see our responsibilities. If we're here by accident, then perhaps our only obligation is to ourselves, to survive and reproduce and find whatever meaning we can create. But if we were placed here deliberately, then our existence might serve purposes larger than our individual lives. We might be caretakers, students, experiments, or contributors to something we can't yet see in its entirety. These possibilities don't exist in isolation from each other. Perhaps multiple forms of intelligence played roles in our placement. Perhaps extraterrestrial gardeners, future humans, divine consciousness, and cosmic processes all participated in bringing us to this moment. The universe might be layered with intention, each level contributing to the emergence of beings capable of asking these very questions. What makes this exploration so compelling is not that it provides easy answers, but that it opens our imagination to possibilities we might otherwise never consider. It asks us to step outside our usual assumptions about randomness and accident, to entertain the idea that existence might be far more intentional than we typically allow ourselves to believe. And maybe that's the real power of the question. Whether or not we were literally placed here by some external intelligence, the very act of considering the possibility changes our relationship with the world around us. It makes us more aware of the extraordinary nature of our existence, more grateful for the precise conditions that allow us to be here, more conscious of our role in whatever larger story we're part of. The forests, the oceans, the sky itself begin to look different when viewed through this lens. Instead of simply being the backdrop for human activity, they become part of an intricate stage, carefully prepared for the drama of consciousness to unfold. Every sunrise becomes less routine and more remarkable. Every breath becomes a reminder of how perfectly calibrated our environment is for our survival. This shift in perspective doesn't require belief in any particular theory of placement. It simply asks us to hold space for wonder, to remain open to possibilities beyond the purely mechanistic. And in that openness, something beautiful happens. The world becomes more mysterious, not less. Our daily experience becomes richer, not simpler. We begin to see ourselves not as isolated accidents, but as integral parts of something vast and meaningful. As we continue this exploration together, we'll dive deeper into each of these possibilities. We'll examine the evidence, the myths, the scientific theories, and the philosophical implications. We quote, "Look at what our DNA might tell us, what ancient monuments might whisper, what the structure of consciousness itself might reveal about our origins." But for now, let's simply sit with the question itself. What if we were placed here? Feel how it changes the weight of this moment, how it transforms the simple act of existing into something charged with possibility and purpose. Because when you really begin to examine the details of our existence here, patterns emerge that feel almost too precise to ignore. Consider comma, for instance, the peculiar story written in our very bones, our blood, our breath. The human body seems almost engineered for this specific world, tuned to frequencies and rhythms that match Earth's particular song. We breathe a mixture that is 21% oxygen, not the 19% that would leave us gasping, not the 23% that would make everything combustible. Our blood flows at pressures perfectly calibrated for this planet's gravity. Our eyes detect exactly the wavelengths of light that penetrate our atmosphere, most effectively. Our internal clocks tick in harmony with the rotation of this world, cycling through sleep and wakefulness. As day becomes night, becomes day again. Even our bones carry the signature of this place. Their density, their structure, the way calcium integrates into their matrix, all of it reflects a long relationship with Earth's specific gravitational pull. Astronauts who spend months in space return with bones that have begun to forget their terrestrial origins, becoming less dense, more brittle, as if the very architecture of their bodies was designed for this world and no other. But perhaps the most intriguing aspect of our physical existence is how unnecessary some of our capabilities seem to be. Evolution typically doesn't overproduce. It doesn't waste energy on features that don't contribute to survival. Yet humans appear to be dramatically overbuilt for the basic requirements of staying alive. Our brains consume roughly 20% of our body's energy, an enormous investment for any organism. Most animals get by with far less neural overhead, yet somehow natural selection decided to burden us with these expensive, energy-hungry thinking machines. Why would survival require the capacity for abstract mathematics, for composing symphonies, for pondering the nature of existence itself? We can process information at rates far exceeding what hunting and gathering would demand. We can hold complex social relationships in our minds involving hundreds of individuals, track subtle changes in facial expressions that reveal emotional states, and engage in forms of communication so sophisticated that they allow us to share not just information about immediate threats and opportunities, but entire worlds of imagination. This overbuilding extends beyond cognition. Our hands possess a dexterity that seems almost excessive for basic tool use. 27 bones in each hand, working in concert with muscles, tendons, and ligaments to create movements of extraordinary precision. We can thread needles, play musical instruments, create art that captures not just visual reality, but emotional truth. Our vocal apparatus can produce thousands of distinct sounds, allowing for languages of stunning complexity and beauty. Standing upright freed our hands for manipulation, but it also created vulnerabilities. Difficult childbirth due to narrow pelvises, vulnerable spines prone to injury, slower running speeds that left us exposed to faster predators. Yet somehow we not only survived these disadvantages, we thrived with them, suggesting that the benefits of our configuration outweighed the costs in ways that aren't immediately obvious. The timeline of these developments adds another layer of mystery. Archaeological evidence suggests that modern human cognitive abilities appeared relatively suddenly, at least in evolutionary terms. For hundreds of thousands of years, our ancestors maintained roughly the same level of technological sophistication. Then, beginning around 50,000 years ago, something remarkable happened. Art exploded into existence, not simple scratches or crude representations, but sophisticated images that demonstrate advanced planning, symbolic thinking, and aesthetic sensibility. Cave paintings in France and Spain reveal artists who understood perspective, who could capture the essence of animal movement, who were working with concepts of beauty that still resonate with us today. Music appears around the same time, evidenced by carefully crafted bone flutes that required considerable skill to create and play. These weren't accidental discoveries or crude approximations. They represent sophisticated understanding of acoustics, of pitch relationships, of the emotional power of organized sound. Language likely underwent significant development during this period as well, though its traces are harder to find in the archaeological record. But the complexity of the art, the coordination required for the construction projects we find from this era, the evidence of long-distance trade networks, all suggest forms of communication far more advanced than simple gesture and basic vocalization. This flowering of human capability happened rapidly and simultaneously across multiple domains. It's as if our ancestors reached some kind of threshold and suddenly capabilities that had been latent became active all at once. The archaeological record doesn't show gradual improvement in artistic ability, slowly developing musical sophistication, or step-by-step advances in symbolic thinking. Instead, it shows arrival, emergence, the sudden presence of fully formed human consciousness. Some scientists explain this as the result of genetic changes that reached critical mass around this time. Perhaps mutations in genes or neural connectivity finally accumulate, controlling brain development. Language processing to the point where they triggered qualitative leaps in cognitive ability. But even this explanation leaves questions unanswered. Why did these changes happen when they did? Why were they so comprehensive? And why don't we see similar leaps in other species with complex brains? The rapidity of human cultural development becomes even more puzzling when compared to other intelligent animals. Dolphins have had large brains for millions of years, yet they haven't developed technology or art or apparent symbolic communication systems. Elephants demonstrate remarkable memory, complex social relationships, and even what appears to be mourning behavior. But they haven't created monuments or written languages. Crows and other corvids show problem-solving abilities that rival those of young children. But they haven't built civilizations. What made humans different? What triggered the explosion of capability that separated us so dramatically from every other form of life on Earth? The question becomes more intriguing when you consider that this separation wasn't gradual. It wasn't a slow divergence over millions of years. It was relatively sudden, a burst of development that created a gulf between us and our closest relatives that seems almost impossible to bridge. Even our closest genetic cousins, chimpanzees and bonobos, remain locked in patterns of behavior that haven't changed significantly in thousands of years. They use simple tools, engage in complex social interactions, and demonstrate forms of learning and problem-solving that reveal considerable intelligence. But they haven't crossed the threshold into symbolic representation, abstract thinking, or cumulative cultural development. The genetic difference between humans and chimpanzees is remarkably small, less than 2%. Yet that tiny variation in our DNA has produced beings capable of spaceflight, quantum physics, and philosophical inquiry. How can such a minimal genetic divergence result in such a maximal difference in capability? This puzzle deepens when we examine the specific genetic changes that seem to distinguish us from other primates. Many of the key differences involve regulatory genes, sequences that don't code for proteins directly, but instead control when and how other genes are expressed. These regulatory changes can have cascading effects, small adjustments in timing or intensity that produce major alterations in development. Some researchers have identified what they call human-accelerated regions, stretches of DNA that evolved unusually rapidly in our lineage compared to other species. Many of these regions are associated with brain development, neural connectivity, or the capacity for language. It as if someone went through our genome with a very precise editor, making targeted modifications that enhanced specific cognitive abilities while leaving most other systems unchanged. The speed of these genetic changes also raises eyebrows. Evolution typically works slowly, testing modifications across many generations before beneficial traits become widespread. But some of the genetic features that distinguish humans appear to have emerged and spread through populations remarkably quickly, almost as if they were strongly selected for or introduced in ways that bypass the usual gradual processes. There's also the curious case of chromosome 2. Humans have 23 pairs of chromosomes, while other great apes have 20-4. At some point in our evolutionary history, two ancestral chromosomes fused together to create our chromosome 2. The fusion site is still visible in our DNA, marked by telomeric sequences in the middle of the chromosome, where the two original chromosomes joined end to end. Chromosomal fusions do occur naturally, but the timing and consequences of this particular fusion seem significant. It created structural changes that may have influenced our development in ways that separated us further from our relatives. Some geneticists marvel at how cleanly the fusion occurred, preserving essential genetic information while reshaping our chromosomal architecture in ways that may have contributed to our unique characteristics. These genetic peculiarities might simply represent the natural variation that drives evolution forward. Random mutations that happened to produce beneficial effects, changes that were tested by natural selection and found advantageous. But their clustering in time, their specific effects on cognitive ability, and their rapid spread through human populations create a pattern that feels less random and more directed. If we were placed here, our genome would be exactly where we might expect to find the evidence, not in the form of obvious artificial constructs, but in the subtle signatures of targeted modifications, the kind of precise editing that could enhance specific capabilities while maintaining overall biological integrity. The question isn't whether these genetic changes occurred, the evidence for them is clear. The question is whether they represent the natural unfolding of evolutionary processes, or something more intentional, more guided, more purposeful than we typically imagine possible. Looking at these genetic signatures, we begin to notice something else equally puzzling. The timing of human development doesn't just show sudden acceleration in our cognitive abilities. It also reveals gaps, missing pieces in the archaeological record that feel almost too convenient to ignore. There are periods where our ancestors seem to have possessed knowledge or capabilities that don't quite match what we'd expect from the gradual accumulation of discovery. Consider the megalithic structures scattered across the globe. Göbekli Tepe in Turkey, built over 11,000 years ago, predates agriculture by thousands of years. According to conventional timelines, the people who constructed it should have been nomadic hunter-gatherers, lacking the social organization and specialized labor necessary for such monumental architecture. Yet there it stands. Massive stone pillars arranged in precise circles, decorated with intricate carvings that demonstrate sophisticated artistic vision. The logistics alone are staggering. Some of the pillars weigh over 15 tons. Moving them would have required coordinated effort from dozens of people, along with tools and techniques that archaeologists struggle to reconstruct. The site shows evidence of deliberate burial after its construction, as if its builders decided to hide it from future generations. Why would a supposedly primitive culture invest so much effort in creating something only to cover it up? Similar mysteries appear at other ancient sites. The precision of the pyramids in Egypt, aligned to cardinal directions with accuracy that rivals modern surveying techniques. The astronomical alignments at Stonehenge, demonstrating knowledge of celestial mechanics that would have required centuries of careful observation. The megalithic walls at Sacsayhuaman in Peru, where stones weighing hundreds of tons were fitted together so precisely that you can't slide a knife blade between them. Each of these accomplishments could potentially be explained by human ingenuity and determination. Ancient people were no less intelligent than we are, and given enough time and motivation, they could certainly have developed sophisticated techniques for construction and astronomy. But the clustering of these achievements, their appearance at times when human civilization was supposedly in its infancy, creates a pattern that feels less like gradual development and more like knowledge appearing ahead of schedule. Ancient texts add another layer to this puzzle. Sumerian tablets describe the Anunnaki not as mythological figures, but as beings who taught humans agriculture, metallurgy, and the fundamentals of civilization. The level of detail in these accounts is striking. They don't read like stories invented to explain natural phenomena, but like historical records, albeit ones describing events that don't fit our current understanding of human development. Similar accounts appear in cultures around the world. The Vedic texts of India describe vimanas, flying vehicles operated by beings from the heavens. The descriptions are surprisingly technical, including details about propulsion systems, navigation methods, and even aerial combat. Egyptian texts speak of gods who descended from the sky to establish divine kingdoms. Mayan codices describe visitors who brought knowledge of astronomy, mathematics, and calendar making. The consistency of these accounts across separated cultures is noteworthy. If they were simply mythological inventions, we might expect more variation in the details. Instead, we find recurring themes of beings from above bringing knowledge to humanity, teaching skills that enabled the development of civilization, and then departing, leaving only traces of their presence. Modern analysis of these ancient texts has revealed knowledge that seems anachronistic. The Dogon people of West Africa possess detailed information about Sirius B, a white dwarf star that isn't visible to the naked eye and wasn't confirmed by Western astronomy until the 20th century. Their traditions describe it as a small, dense companion to Sirius, made of material heavier than anything found on Earth. How did an isolated African culture acquire such specific astronomical knowledge? Similar anomalies appear in other traditions. Ancient Indian texts contain descriptions of atomic theory that wouldn't be formally developed in the West until the 19th century. Mayan calendars demonstrate understanding of planetary cycles that require sophisticated mathematical calculation. Egyptian texts include medical procedures that show knowledge of anatomy and physiology that seems advanced for their time. These could all be coincidences, lucky guesses, or the result of careful observation and logical reasoning. Ancient people had the same cognitive abilities we do, and given enough time and attention, they might well have discovered principles we think of as modern. But the precision and specificity of some of this knowledge pushes against the boundaries of what seems likely to emerge through independent observation alone. The question becomes even more intriguing when we consider the gaps in our historical record. Most of human prehistory remains invisible to us. We have scattered artifacts, fragments of bone and stone, but vast stretches of time remain essentially blank. If advanced knowledge existed in ancient times, if there were periods of greater sophistication than we currently recognize, most traces of it would have vanished long ago. Organic materials decay rapidly in most climates. Wood, leather, textiles, even metal objects corrode and disappear within centuries unless preserved under exceptional conditions. Stone monuments survive. But they represent only a tiny fraction of what any culture produces. Most of human activity leaves no permanent trace, especially over periods measured in thousands or tens of thousands of years. This erasure is so thorough that even recent history contains enormous gaps. We know almost nothing about the daily lives of ordinary people from just a few centuries ago. Their thoughts, their relationships, their understanding of the world around them, all of it has vanished except for the occasional written record or preserved artifact. If such recent history can disappear so completely, what might we be missing from the deeper past? Perhaps the anomalies in ancient knowledge represent not outside intervention, but lost human achievements. Maybe our ancestors reached levels of sophistication that were later forgotten, wiped out by catastrophes or cultural disruptions. The archaeological record shows evidence of multiple civilization collapses, periods when complex societies simplified rapidly, losing technologies and knowledge systems that had taken centuries to develop. The Bronze Age collapse around 1200 BCE saw the fall of major civilizations across the eastern Mediterranean. Advanced metalworking techniques, writing systems, and trade networks disappeared, not to be redeveloped for centuries. If such collapses could erase knowledge from the historical period, imagine what might have been lost from prehistory. Climate changes could have triggered similar disruptions. The end of the last ice age brought dramatic environmental shifts that would have forced human populations to migrate, adapt, or perish. Rising sea levels submerged coastal areas where many early settlements might have existed. Changing weather patterns could have made previously fertile regions uninhabitable, scattering populations and disrupting the cultural continuity necessary for preserving complex knowledge. Yet even accounting for these natural processes of loss and forgetting, Something about the pattern of ancient knowledge feels unusual. The specific nature of the information preserved in myths and traditions, the technical precision of certain ancient accomplishments, the timing of cognitive and cultural developments in human history, all of it creates a picture that doesn't quite fit the standard narrative of gradual independent human development. Maybe the answer lies not in external placement, but in the peculiar nature of human consciousness itself. Perhaps our minds were somehow prepared for knowledge, pre-configured to recognize patterns and principles that would normally take generations to discover. If consciousness operates according to principles we don't yet understand, if awareness itself connects to information in ways that transcend normal learning processes, then the appearance of advanced knowledge might reflect not outside teaching, but inside awakening. This possibility suggests that placement, if it occurred, might have been more subtle than physical intervention. Instead of beings arriving from elsewhere to teach us directly, perhaps the placement involved preparing our consciousness to access knowledge that already existed in some form, waiting to be recognized and activated when we reach the appropriate level of development. The mystery deepens when we examine not just what our ancestors knew, but how they knew it. The sudden appearance of artistic sophistication, the rapid development of symbolic thinking, the emergence of complex social organization, all suggest changes in human consciousness that go beyond simple accumulation of practical knowledge. It quotes says, as if our minds themselves were somehow enhanced, given capabilities that enabled us to perceive and manipulate reality in entirely new ways. This cognitive transformation wasn't gradual. The archaeological record shows relatively little change in human capabilities for hundreds of thousands of years, followed by an explosion of innovation that remade our entire relationship with the world around us. We learned to see patterns in nature that enabled prediction and control. We developed languages capable of preserving and transmitting abstract concepts. We began to imagine possibilities that didn't yet exist, and then work to make them real. These capabilities seem almost too sophisticated for beings who had spent most of their evolutionary history focused on immediate survival needs. Yet they appeared, apparently suddenly, and with them came the foundation for everything we recognize as distinctly human culture. The development of human consciousness brings us to perhaps the most puzzling aspect of our existence. Not just that we became aware, but that we became aware of being aware. We don't simply react to hunger or danger like other animals. We contemplate the meaning of hunger, create philosophies around suffering, build entire systems of thought about the nature of existence itself. This metacognition, this ability to think about thinking, seems almost excessive from a survival perspective. A gazelle doesn't need to ponder the existential implications of being chased by a lion. It simply runs. Yet humans developed minds that not only process immediate threats and opportunities, but also construct elaborate internal worlds of memory, imagination, and abstract reasoning. We dream in narratives that rival the complexity of our waking experiences. We create art that serves no obvious survival function, but fulfills some deeper need for expression and meaning. We develop moral frameworks that often require us to act against our immediate self-interest, in service of abstract principles like justice or compassion. Most remarkably, we possess what philosophers call the hard problem of consciousness. It's not just that our brains process information, but that there's someone home experiencing that processing. There's a subjective inner dimension to human existence that seems to transcend the mechanical operations of neural networks. Why would natural selection produce beings capable of questioning their own existence? Why would survival require the capacity for wonder, for awe, for the kind of deep curiosity that drives us to explore not just our physical environment, but the nature of reality itself? These capabilities seem to go far beyond what hunting, gathering, and reproduction would demand. The emergence of language adds another layer to this mystery. Human linguistic ability isn't simply an enhanced version of animal communication. It represents a qualitative leap that enabled us to share not just information about immediate circumstances, but entire conceptual frameworks. We can describe things that don't exist, imagine scenarios that have never occurred, and pass complex ideas across generations through nothing more than organized sound or symbolic marks. The speed with which language appears in human development is startling. Children don't gradually learn to communicate through years of careful instruction. They seem to acquire language naturally, almost inevitably, as if their minds were already structured to recognize and generate the complex patterns that make linguistic communication possible. This suggests that our brains came pre-equipped for language in ways that other species' brains apparently did not. Archaeological evidence indicates that once symbolic communication emerged, it spread rapidly across human populations. We don't find gradual transitions from simple gesture-based systems to complex languages. Instead, wherever we discover evidence of human symbolic behavior, it appears to be fully formed, sophisticated, and capable of handling abstract concepts. The development of writing represents another sudden leap. For thousands of years, humans maintained oral traditions that could preserve stories, knowledge, and cultural practices across generations. Then, in several locations around the world, writing systems appeared almost simultaneously. Sumerian cuneiform, Egyptian hieroglyphics, Chinese characters, each emerging independently, but around roughly the same historical period. These weren't crude approximations that gradually improved over centuries. Early writing systems demonstrate sophisticated understanding of how to represent spoken language through visual symbols, how to organize information for storage and retrieval, and how to create systems flexible enough to handle both concrete and abstract concepts. The cognitive leap required to move from purely oral culture to written record keeping seems almost impossibly large to have occurred so rapidly. Mathematics presents a similar puzzle. The ability to manipulate abstract numerical relationships, to see patterns in quantities and spatial arrangements, to develop logical systems that can model aspects of reality with precision. All of this requires forms of thinking that seem far removed from the practical needs of early human survival. Yet, mathematical thinking appears early in human history and develops rapidly. Ancient civilizations demonstrated understanding of geometry, sophisticated enough for monumental architecture, astronomy precise enough for accurate calendars, and numerical systems capable of handling complex calculations. The mathematical principles they discovered weren't just practical tools, but insights into the fundamental structure of reality itself. The consistency of mathematical truth across cultures suggests that humans were discovering rather than inventing these relationships. Pi has the same value whether calculated by ancient Egyptians or modern computers. Geometric principles work the same way in all human societies. Mathematical relationships seem to exist independently of human culture, waiting to be recognized by minds capable of perceiving them. This points to something profound about human consciousness. We appear to be tuned to recognize patterns and principles that exist at the deepest levels of reality. Our minds can grasp concepts like infinity, understand relationships between abstract quantities, and perceive harmonies in both mathematical and musical structures that reveal underlying order in apparent chaos. The artistic impulse presents perhaps the most mysterious aspect of human consciousness. From the earliest cave paintings to the most sophisticated contemporary works, humans have felt compelled to create beauty, to capture meaning in visual, auditory, and narrative forms that serve no obvious survival function. Art seems to emerge from some inner necessity, some drive to express and communicate experiences that can't be reduced to practical information. The sophistication of early human art is remarkable. Cave paintings from tens of thousands of years ago demonstrate not just observational skill, but understanding of perspective, composition, and symbolic representation. These weren't crude attempts to record visual information, but sophisticated works that reveal aesthetic sensibilities still recognizable today. Music appears to have developed alongside visual art, with carefully crafted instruments dating back thousands of years. The emotional impact of organized sound, the way certain combinations of tones can evoke specific feelings or states of consciousness, suggests that human auditory systems were somehow prepared to recognize and respond to acoustic patterns that create meaning beyond mere communication. The universality of artistic expression across human cultures indicates that the drive to create isn't learned, but inherent. Children begin drawing, singing, and storytelling without instruction, as if their minds naturally seek outlets for creative expression. This universality suggests that artistic capability is built into human consciousness at a fundamental level. The development of ritual and ceremony adds another dimension to the puzzle of human consciousness. Early humans created elaborate burial practices, constructed ceremonial sites, and developed complex social rituals that required coordinated group behavior and shared symbolic understanding. These practices suggest awareness not just of immediate reality, but of concepts like mortality, transcendence, and meaning that extend far beyond survival needs. Religious and spiritual thinking appears early in human history and takes remarkably similar forms across isolated cultures. The sense of connection to something greater than individual existence, the recognition of mystery and transcendence, the development of practices designed to access non-ordinary states of consciousness. All of this suggests that human minds are structured to perceive dimensions of reality that aren't immediately apparent. The capacity for moral reasoning presents another uniquely human characteristic. We don't simply follow instinctual patterns of behavior, but develop complex ethical systems that often require us to act against immediate impulses in service of abstract principles. The ability to recognize right and wrong, to feel guilt and responsibility, to sacrifice personal advantage for collective good. These capabilities seem to transcend what basic survival would require. Even our relationship with time reveals the unusual nature of human consciousness. We don't simply exist in the present moment like other animals, but maintain elaborate mental constructions of past and future. We can relive experiences through memory, imagine possibilities that don't yet exist, and create plans that extend far beyond immediate needs. This temporal awareness allows us to learn from history, anticipate consequences, and work toward goals that may take generations to achieve. The emergence of these cognitive capabilities creates a picture of human consciousness that seems almost purposefully designed for questioning, creating, and transcending immediate circumstances. If we were placed here, perhaps the most significant aspect of that placement wasn't our physical bodies or our genetic structure, but the particular configuration of awareness that allows us to recognize patterns, create meaning, and contemplate our own existence. This consciousness doesn't just process information, it transforms it. We take raw sensory input and construct from it entire worlds of meaning, significance, and possibility. We see not just what is, but what could be. We perceive not just physical relationships, but moral, aesthetic, and spiritual dimensions that seem to exist beyond material reality. The speed with which these capabilities emerged, their universality across human cultures, and their apparent excess beyond survival requirements all suggest that human consciousness might represent something more than the accidental byproduct of neural complexity. Perhaps it represents the activation of capacities that were somehow prepared in advance, waiting for the right conditions to fully manifest. If placement occurred, it might not have required external intervention in the physical world. Perhaps it involved the introduction of consciousness itself, the spark of awareness that transforms mere biological information processing into the rich inner life that characterizes human experience. In this view, placement becomes less about bodies and more about minds, less about genetics and more about the mysterious emergence of subjective experience. The question then becomes, not just whether we were placed here, but whether consciousness itself represents a kind of placement, an introduction of awareness into biological systems that were prepared to receive and express it. This possibility reframes the entire discussion, suggesting that the most significant aspect of human existence might not be our physical presence on Earth, but the presence within us of awareness capable of recognizing its own existence and questioning its origins. As we sit with these possibilities, something profound shifts in how we understand our moment-to-moment experience. The simple act of listening to these words, of processing their meaning, of feeling whatever responses they evoke, becomes evidence of something extraordinary. Here we are, arrangements of atoms and molecules that have somehow become aware of themselves, capable of contemplating questions that stretch across cosmic scales while remaining grounded in the intimate reality of individual consciousness. Whether this awareness emerged through purely natural processes or represents some form of placement, its existence remains one of the deepest mysteries we encounter. And perhaps that mystery itself points towards something significant about why we might be here at all. What makes this exploration even more compelling is how these questions about placement intersect with the physical evidence we find scattered across our planet. Not the grand monuments or ancient texts, but something far more intimate and immediate. The very ground beneath our feet tells a story, and when we learn to read it properly, that story contains chapters that feel almost too convenient to be accidental. Consider the fossil record, that long archive written in stone and sediment. For most of Earth's history, change moved at a pace that matched geological time. Species appeared, adapted slowly, and disappeared over spans that stretched across millions of years. The rhythm was steady, predictable, almost mechanical in its gradual unfolding. Then something different began to happen, particularly in the story of human development. The bones we find, the tools preserved in ancient soil, the evidence of early human behavior, they don't tell a story of smooth progression. Instead, they reveal something more punctuated, more dramatic. Long periods of relative stability, interrupted by sudden bursts of change that seem to happen too quickly for comfort. It quote, as if someone occasionally reached into the natural timeline and pressed fast forward, accelerating developments that should have taken much longer to unfold. Take the expansion of human brain size. For millions of years, our ancestors carried brains that grew incrementally, following the patient rhythm of evolutionary change. Then, in a relatively short span, brain volume nearly doubled. This wasn't a gradual increase spread across many generations. It was a rapid transformation that created beings with neural architecture far more complex than anything required for basic survival. The energy cost of this transformation was enormous. Brains are metabolically expensive organs, demanding constant fuel, requiring complex support systems, making childbirth dangerous, and leaving infants vulnerable for extended periods. Evolution typically avoids such costly investments unless the benefits clearly outweigh the risks. Yet somehow, natural selection decided to make this particular gamble, and it paid off in ways that completely transformed the trajectory of life on Earth. But brain size alone doesn't explain the leap in human capability. Neanderthals had brains as large as ours, sometimes larger, yet they maintained essentially the same tool-making traditions for hundreds of thousands of years. Something else changed in our lineage, something that went beyond mere neural volume to fundamentally alter how those brains functioned. Modern genetic research has begun to identify some of these changes, and they're remarkably specific. Mutations in genes that control neural development, alterations in DNA sequences that affect how brain cells connect with each other, modifications in regulatory systems that determine when and how certain cognitive abilities come online during development. These changes weren't scattered randomly across our genome. They clustered around functions related to language, abstract thinking, and social cooperation. The timing of these genetic modifications is particularly intriguing. Many appear to have occurred and spread through human populations much more rapidly than typical evolutionary change would predict. It's as if there was strong selective pressure favoring these particular mechanisms that allowed beneficial traits, or perhaps some other mutations, to become widespread unusually quickly. One of the most studied examples is the FOXP2 gene, which plays a crucial role in language development. The human version differs from that found in other primates by just a few key changes. But those changes appear to have had profound effects on our ability to produce and process complex speech. Studies suggest this modification occurred relatively recently in evolutionary terms, within the last few 100,000 years, and spread rapidly through human populations. What makes this particularly interesting is that language ability seems to have emerged fully formed rather than gradually. We don't find evidence of proto-languages or intermediate stages of linguistic development. Wherever humans developed symbolic communication, it appears to have been sophisticated from the start, capable of handling abstract concepts, complex grammar, and the kind of recursive thinking that allows us to build ideas within ideas within ideas. This pattern of sudden, complete emergence extends beyond language to other uniquely human capabilities. Art, music, ritual behavior, mathematical thinking all appear to have crystallized rapidly rather than developing through obvious intermediate stages. It's almost as if our ancestors reached some kind of cognitive threshold and multiple advanced capabilities activated simultaneously. The archaeological record supports this interpretation. For vast stretches of prehistory, human material culture remained relatively static. The same types of stone tools, the same basic survival strategies, the same apparent level of social organization. Then, beginning around 50,000 years ago, everything changed. Not gradually, but dramatically and seemingly all at once. Cave art exploded into existence, demonstrating not just observational skill, but sophisticated understanding of perspective, composition, and symbolic representation. Musical instruments appeared, carefully crafted to produce specific tones and harmonies. Burial practices became elaborate, suggesting complex beliefs about death, identity, and perhaps afterlife. Trade networks extended across vast distances, indicating social organization and communication abilities far beyond anything seen previously. This transformation wasn't limited to one region or group. Evidence of advanced human behavior appears simultaneously across Africa, Europe, and Asia, as if the same cognitive awakening was happening in multiple populations at roughly the same time. The synchronicity is remarkable, suggesting that whatever triggered this leap in human capability was acting on a species-wide level rather than emerging through isolated cultural innovation. Some researchers have proposed that this represents the moment when modern human consciousness fully came online. Perhaps earlier humans possessed the neural hardware for advanced thinking, but lacked some crucial software component that would allow them to access their full cognitive potential. Then something changed. Some final piece fell into place, and suddenly minds that had been constrained by limitations we can barely imagine were free to explore the full range of human possibility. But what could have triggered such a transformation? Natural evolutionary processes typically don't produce such coordinated, rapid changes across multiple populations. The geographic distribution and timing suggests something more systematic, more directed than random genetic drift or isolated cultural innovation. This is where the placement hypothesis becomes particularly intriguing. If some form of intelligence was guiding human development, the pattern we see in the archaeological record matches exactly what we might expect. Long periods of gradual development, punctuated by sudden leaps that seem too coordinated and comprehensive to emerge through purely natural processes. The transformation wasn't just cognitive, it was also deeply spiritual, involving the emergence of behaviors that suggest awareness of dimensions beyond immediate physical reality. Early humans began creating art that served no obvious practical function, but fulfilled some inner need for expression and meaning. They developed rituals that required coordinated group behavior and shared symbolic understanding. They started burying their dead with care and ceremony, suggesting beliefs about consciousness that transcended bodily existence. These behaviors indicate not just intelligence, but wisdom, not just problem-solving ability, but insight into the nature of existence itself. The speed with which these capabilities appeared suggests they weren't learned through trial and error, but accessed through some form of awakening or activation. Perhaps most significantly, this period marks the emergence of self-reflective consciousness. The ability to think about thinking itself. Humans began to create representations not just of external reality, but of internal states, emotional experiences, abstract concepts that existed only in the realm of mind. This metacognitive ability seems almost impossibly sophisticated to have emerged through gradual development. The implications extend beyond individual consciousness to collective intelligence. Early humans developed the ability to share complex ideas, to build knowledge across generations, to create cultural systems that could preserve and transmit insights that took lifetimes to develop. This collective dimension of human intelligence allowed our species to transcend the limitations of individual learning and begin the process of cumulative cultural evolution that would eventually lead to civilization. Looking at this transformation from the perspective of placement, it appears less like random evolutionary accident and more like the activation of latent potential. As if human neural architecture had been prepared in advance for capabilities that wouldn't be needed until our species reached a certain level of development. The sudden emergence of art, language, ritual, and abstract thinking suggests not gradual discovery, but recognition, not invention, but remembering. This interpretation is supported by the universality of certain human capabilities. Children don't gradually learn to be creative or gradually develop moral intuitions. These capacities seem to be built into human consciousness from the beginning, waiting to be activated by appropriate environmental triggers. The consistency of human nature across cultures and throughout history suggests that we're all working with the same basic cognitive template, one that seems almost too sophisticated for creatures that spent most of their evolutionary history focused on immediate survival needs. The development of mathematical thinking provides another compelling example. The ability to perceive abstract numerical relationships, to recognize patterns in spatial arrangements, to understand logical principles that govern physical reality. These capabilities seem far removed from anything required for hunting, gathering, or basic social cooperation. Yet they appear early in human history and develop rapidly wherever civilization emerges. Mathematical truths are universal. Pi has the same value whether calculated by ancient Babylonians or modern computers. Geometric principles work identically in all human cultures. The Pythagorean theorem describes relationships that exist independently of human culture or belief. This universality suggests that mathematics isn't something humans invented, but something we discovered, patterns and principles that were already embedded in the structure of reality, waiting to be recognized by minds capable of perceiving them. The same universality characterizes other aspects of human consciousness. Musical harmony creates similar emotional responses across cultures. Certain visual proportions are perceived as beautiful by people everywhere. Moral intuitions about fairness, compassion, and justice appear in all human societies, suggesting that ethical reasoning is built into our cognitive architecture rather than learned through cultural transmission. This universality points towards something profound about the nature of human consciousness. We appear to be tuned to recognize patterns and principles that exist at fundamental levels of reality. Our minds can grasp concepts that transcend immediate sensory experience, understand relationships that exist in abstract spaces, perceive harmonies and symmetries that reveal underlying order in apparent chaos. If consciousness was somehow placed within human neural architecture, these capabilities make perfect sense. They represent not random evolutionary accidents, but purposeful design features, capacities that would allow beings like us to eventually understand and participate in the deeper patterns that govern existence itself. The artistic impulse provides perhaps the clearest example of this purposeful sophistication. From the earliest cave paintings to contemporary works, humans have felt compelled to create beauty, to capture meaning in forms that serve no obvious survival function. Art emerges from some inner necessity that transcends practical needs. Some drive to express experiences that can't be reduced to mere information. The emotional power of artistic expression suggests that human consciousness is structured to recognize and respond to patterns of meaning that exist beyond material reality. A piece of music can evoke profound emotional responses, even though it consists of nothing but organized vibrations in air. A painting can communicate insights about the human condition through nothing but arrangements of color and form. Poetry can capture truths about existence using combinations of words that transcend their literal meanings. These responses aren't learned. They appear to be built into the basic architecture of human awareness, suggesting that our consciousness was designed to perceive and participate in dimensions of reality that extend far beyond physical survival needs. If placement occurred, perhaps its most significant aspect wasn't the introduction of biological capabilities, but the installation of awareness itself, consciousness capable of recognizing beauty, meaning, and transcendence. The development of spiritual and religious thinking provides additional evidence for this interpretation. Humans everywhere develop beliefs about dimensions of reality that extend beyond immediate sensory experience. The sense of connection to something greater than individual existence, recognition of mystery and transcendence, practices designed to access non-ordinary states of consciousness. All of this appears universally across human cultures. These spiritual intuitions seem to emerge naturally from human consciousness rather than being imposed through cultural conditioning. Children often display innate sense of wonder, connection to nature, and awareness of mystery that adults sometimes lose, but never completely forget. This suggests that spiritual sensitivity is built into human awareness at a fundamental level. Religious and mystical traditions consistently describe experiences of unity, transcendence, and direct perception of deeper realities that exist beyond the physical world. While the specific forms these experiences take vary across cultures, their underlying structure remains remarkably consistent. Mystics from completely different traditions often describe identical insights about the nature of consciousness and its relationship to ultimate reality. This consistency suggests that human consciousness is structured to recognize and access dimensions of existence that aren't immediately apparent through ordinary perception. If placement occurred, perhaps it involved not just the introduction of biological capabilities, but the preparation of awareness to eventually recognize its own deeper nature and its connection to larger patterns of meaning and purpose. The question of moral reasoning adds another layer to this mystery. Humans don't simply follow instinctual behavioral patterns like other animals. We develop complex ethical systems that often require us to act against immediate impulses in service of abstract principles. The ability to recognize right and wrong, to feel responsibility for our actions, to sacrifice personal advantage for collective good, these capabilities seem to transcend what basic survival would require. Moral intuitions appear early in human development and show remarkable consistency across cultures. Children demonstrate understanding of fairness, justice, and compassion before they receive formal ethical instruction. Adults everywhere struggle with similar moral dilemmas and reach similar conclusions about fundamental questions of right and wrong. This universality suggests that ethical reasoning is built into human consciousness rather than being purely culturally constructed. The development of moral awareness also seems to involve recognition of principles that exist independently of immediate practical concerns. Concepts like justice, compassion, and human dignity point toward values that transcend material interests and suggest awareness of deeper patterns of meaning that govern existence itself. If consciousness was placed within human neural architecture, moral reasoning makes perfect sense as a design feature. It represents awareness of principles that would allow beings like us to eventually participate in larger patterns of harmony and cooperation that extend far beyond individual or even species-level concerns. Our relationship with time reveals another aspect of consciousness that seems almost too sophisticated for purely biological origins. We don't simply exist in the present moment like other animals. We maintain elaborate mental constructions of past and future, can relive experiences through memory, imagine possibilities that don't yet exist, and create plans that extend across generations. This temporal awareness allows us to learn from history, anticipate consequences, and work toward goals that may take lifetimes to achieve. It also enables us to recognize patterns that unfold across scales much larger than individual experience, to perceive connections between events separated by years or decades, to understand processes that require historical perspective to appreciate fully. The ability to transcend immediate temporal experience seems almost miraculous from a purely materialistic perspective. How does arrangement of neurons and chemical processes create subjective experience of past and future? How does biological information processing generate awareness that can step outside the flow of immediate experience and perceive patterns that extend across vast scales of space and time? These capabilities suggest that human consciousness operates according to principles that transcend ordinary physical processes. If placement occurred, perhaps it involved the introduction not just of biological capacities, but of awareness itself, consciousness that exists independently of its material substrate, and can therefore transcend the limitations that typically constrain purely physical systems. The emergence of language provides the clearest example of this transcendence. Human linguistic ability allows us to share not just information about immediate circumstances, but entire conceptual frameworks, abstract ideas, imaginary scenarios, and insights that exist only in the realm of consciousness. We can describe things that have never existed, communicate experiences that can't be directly shared, and transmit complex knowledge across generations through nothing more than organized sound or symbolic marks. The speed with which language appears in human development is remarkable. Children acquire linguistic competence naturally and inevitably, as if their minds were already structured to recognize and generate the complex patterns that make communication possible. This suggests that language capacity was somehow built into human consciousness from the beginning, waiting to be activated by appropriate environmental conditions. The universality of language across human cultures, combined with the absence of true linguistic ability in other species, points towards something unique about human consciousness. We appear to be the only beings on Earth capable of symbolic representation, abstract thinking, and the kind of recursive mental processes that allow us to embed ideas within ideas within ideas. If placement occurred, language capacity might represent one of its most significant features. The ability to share complex ideas, preserve knowledge across generations, and collaborate on projects that extend beyond individual lifespans would be essential for any species intended to eventually understand and participate in larger patterns of cosmic development. As we contemplate these various aspects of human consciousness, a picture begins to emerge of awareness that seems almost purposefully designed for questioning, creating, and transcending immediate circumstances. Whether this consciousness emerged through purely natural processes or represents some form of placement, its characteristics suggest preparation for roles and responsibilities that extend far beyond basic biological survival. The sophistication of human awareness, the universality of certain cognitive capabilities, and the speed with which they emerged all point toward consciousness that was somehow prepared in advance for the kinds of challenges and opportunities our species would eventually face. If we were placed here, perhaps the most significant aspect of that placement wasn't our physical bodies or even our genetic structure, but this particular configuration of awareness that allows us to recognize patterns, create meaning, and contemplate our own existence. This consciousness transforms everything it touches. We don't simply process sensory information like biological computers. We construct from raw experience entire worlds of meaning, significance, and possibility. We perceive not just what is, but what could be. We recognize not just physical relationships, but moral, aesthetic, and spiritual dimensions that seem to exist beyond material reality. The implications of this transformation extend far beyond individual experience. Human consciousness creates culture, preserves knowledge, builds institutions that can survive across generations, and generates insights that accumulate over time into increasingly sophisticated understanding of reality itself. This collective dimension of awareness suggests that consciousness might serve purposes that extend beyond individual minds to encompass species-level and perhaps even cosmic-level functions. If placement occurred, it might have involved not just the introduction of biological capabilities, but the activation of awareness capable of eventually recognizing its own deeper nature and its connection to larger patterns of meaning and purpose that span scales we're only beginning to imagine. The patterns we've been exploring lead us towards something even more intriguing when we begin to look closely at the physical world around us. Not just the grand sweep of human development or the mysteries locked within our consciousness, but the intricate details of how life itself operates on this planet. Because when you examine the fundamental processes that sustain existence here, you start to notice arrangements that feel almost too precise, too perfectly calibrated to be entirely accidental. Consider something as basic as photosynthesis, the process by which plants convert sunlight into chemical energy. On the surface, it seems straightforward enough. Leaves absorb light, carbon dioxide enters through tiny pores, water travels up from the roots, and through a series of chemical reactions, glucose is produced along with oxygen as a byproduct. Simple biological machinery doing what evolution designed it to do. But when you dive deeper into the mechanics, the precision becomes breathtaking. The wavelengths of light that drive photosynthesis correspond exactly to the spectrum that penetrates Earth's atmosphere most effectively. It's as if the entire system was calibrated to work with the specific type of star we orbit, the particular atmospheric composition we happen to have, the exact distance that places us in what astronomers call the habitable zone. The chlorophyll molecules that capture this light energy are marvels of molecular engineering. They quote, restructured to absorb photons with extraordinary efficiency, channeling that energy through a series of precisely orchestrated electron transfers that would make any human of these transfers is measure-designed solar panel seem crude by comparison. The timinged in femtoseconds, yet they occur with reliability that has sustained life on this planet for billions of years. Even more remarkable is how this process connects to the larger atmospheric system. Plants consume carbon dioxide and release oxygen, while animals do the reverse, breathing oxygen and exhaling carbon dioxide. It's a perfect cycle, a closed-loop system that maintains atmospheric balance with a precision that seems almost intentionally designed. Too much oxygen and everything becomes combustible. Too little and complex life suffocates. Yet somehow the balance holds, maintained by countless individual organisms, each following their own biological imperatives, while contributing to a stability that serves the whole. The water cycle operates with similar precision. Water evaporates from oceans, forms clouds, falls as precipitation, flows through rivers back to the sea. The entire process is driven by solar energy, regulated by atmospheric dynamics, and modulated by the presence of life itself. Forests generate their own rainfall through transpiration. Wetlands filter and purify water as it moves through the landscape. Even the timing seems calibrated, with seasonal patterns that match the needs of different ecosystems around the globe. When you step back and look at these interlocking systems, it's difficult to shake the feeling that they're not just functional but optimized. As if someone surveyed all the possible could support life and select ways or planet arrangements that would work together with maximum efficiency and stability. The biochemical pathways that sustain life, the atmospheric composition that protects it, the hydrological cycles that distribute resources. All of it fits together like components of an elaborate machine designed for a very specific purpose. This integration extends to the geological level as well. Plate tectonics, the slow movement of continental masses across the Earth's surface, plays crucial roles in maintaining conditions suitable for life. The carbon cycle depends partly on volcanic activity that releases stored carbon from the Earth's interior, while weathering processes remove excess carbon from the atmosphere. Mountain building creates diverse habitats and weather patterns. The magnetic field, generated by the planet's molten core shields, would otherwise strip at the atmosphere from solar radiation that away. Even the moon appears to play an essential role in this system. Its gravitational influence creates tides that may have been crucial for the emergence of life from ocean to land. It stabilizes Earth's axial tilt, preventing wild climate swings that could make the planet uninhabitable. The moon's presence affects the length of days, the patterns of seasons, and the complex dynamics of atmospheric circulation. The more scientists study these interconnections, the more they resemble the work of an engineer rather than the random outcomes of physical processes. Each component seems to have been selected not just for its individual function, but for how it contributes to the stability and flourishing of the whole system. It's what some researchers have begun calling the Gaia hypothesis, the idea that Earth functions as a single, self-regulating organism. But this raises profound questions about how such integration could have emerged. Random processes typically produce chaos rather than order. Natural selection works on individual organisms, not planetary systems. Yet somehow, Earth developed not just the capacity to support life, but arrangements that seem almost purposefully designed to nurture its development and ensure its continuation. If we were placed here, this systemic integration makes perfect sense. It suggests not just the introduction of life into an existing environment, but the preparation of an entire planetary system to support the kinds of beings we would eventually become. Every aspect of Earth's functioning, from molecular biochemistry to global atmospheric dynamics, appears calibrated to create conditions where consciousness could emerge and flourish. The timing of our arrival adds another layer to this mystery. Earth is approximately 4.5 billion years old, but complex life only began to appear in the last billion years. For most of the planet's history, it was dominated by simple, single-celled organisms. Then something changed. Cells began to cooperate, forming multicellular structures. Sexual reproduction appeared, accelerating evolutionary development. Photosynthesis flooded the atmosphere with oxygen, enabling more complex metabolic processes. These developments didn't happen randomly. They occurred in sequence, each building on the previous changes in ways that seem almost orchestrated. The emergence of eukaryotic cells, with their sophisticated internal structures, created the foundation for all complex life. The development of sexual reproduction introduced genetic recombination, vastly increasing the potential for evolutionary innovation. The rise of oxygen-producing photosynthesis transformed the entire planetary environment, making possible the metabolic pathways that power complex organisms. By the time multicellular life began to diversify, Earth had become a planet precisely configured to support the kinds of beings we would eventually become. The atmospheric composition was right. The climate was stable. The chemical cycles were established. It was as if the stage had been carefully prepared for the next act in the drama of consciousness. The Cambrian explosion, that remarkable period about 500 million years ago, when most major animal groups appeared in the fossil record, represents another sudden leap that feels almost too dramatic for purely natural processes. In a relatively brief span of time, life experimented with virtually every major body plan that would ever exist. Eyes evolved independently dozens of times. Complex nervous systems appeared. Predation and defense strategies became sophisticated. This wasn't gradual development spread across hundreds of millions of years. It was rapid diversification that created most of the fundamental patterns of animal life in what amounts to a moment in geological time. The coordination and creativity of this explosion suggest processes that go beyond simple natural selection, as if life itself was exploring possibilities with unprecedented freedom and direction. Throughout Earth's history, major transitions seem to occur at precisely the moments when they would be most beneficial for the continued development of complexity and consciousness. Mass extinction events, rather than ending the story of life, appear to clear ecological space for new forms to emerge. Climate changes, instead of destroying existing ecosystems, seem to drive evolutionary innovation. Even asteroid impacts, while devastating in the short term, may have eliminated species that were preventing the emergence of more sophisticated forms of life. The extinction of the dinosaurs provides the clearest example of this pattern. For over 100 million years, dinosaurs dominated terrestrial ecosystems, filling virtually every ecological niche. Mammals existed during this period, but they remained small, nocturnal creatures living in the shadows of their reptilian contemporaries. Then, 65 million years ago, an asteroid impact eliminated the dinosaurs and created opportunities for mammals to diversify rapidly into forms that would eventually give rise to human beings. From one perspective, this was simply bad luck for the dinosaurs and good fortune for mammals. But from another viewpoint, it appears almost precisely timed to enable the next phase of evolutionary development. If the asteroid had struck earlier, mammals might not have been sufficiently developed to take advantage of the opportunity. If it had struck later, dinosaurs might have evolved intelligence first, potentially preventing the emergence of the lineage that would lead to humans. This pattern of apparent timing extends throughout the geological record. Major environmental changes consistently seem to occur at moments when they facilitate, rather than prevent, the development of greater complexity and consciousness. Ice ages drive innovation and adaptation. Volcanic events create new habitats and opportunities. Climate shifts force species to develop new capabilities. It's possible that these are simply the events we notice because we exist to observe them. In a universe where countless worlds experience countless changes, we might naturally find ourselves on the one where circumstances happen to align in ways that permitted our emergence. This is the anthropic principle again, the idea that we observe a universe suitable for our existence, simply because unsuitable universes wouldn't contain observers. But the precision and coordination of these changes pushes against purely coincidental explanations. The development of Earth's life-supporting systems shows signs of optimization that seem to exceed what random processes typically produce. The timing of major transitions suggests coordination across scales that range from molecular to planetary. The integration of biological, geological, and atmospheric processes resembles the work of intelligence rather than accident. If placement occurred, it might have involved not just the introduction of life or consciousness, but the preparation of an entire planetary system optimized for the development of beings like ourselves. Every aspect of Earth's functioning, from the behavior of individual atoms to the dynamics of global climate, appears designed to support the emergence and flourishing of consciousness. This systemic approach to placement would explain many of the puzzles we encounter when we study our world carefully. The fine-tuning of physical constants that make complex chemistry possible. the precise astronomical arrangements that create stable, life-supporting conditions, the timing of geological and biological transitions that consistently facilitate rather than prevent the development of greater complexity. Perhaps most significantly, it would explain why Earth seems so perfectly suited, not just for life in general, but for the specific kind of life we represent. Beings capable of science, art, philosophy, and spiritual insight require very particular conditions to emerge and develop. They need stable climates that permit long-term cultural development. They need access to energy sources that can power technological civilization. They need environments that stimulate curiosity and creativity rather than merely demanding survival. Earth provides all of these conditions with a precision that seems almost impossible to attribute to chance alone. The planet's resources are distributed in ways that encourage exploration and trade. Its climate variations create challenges that stimulate innovation without being so extreme as to prevent cultural development. Its geological processes provide access to materials necessary for technology while maintaining long-term environmental stability. Even the aesthetic qualities of our world seem calibrated for beings like ourselves. The beauty of natural landscapes, the emotional impact of sunrises and sunsets, the way certain environments evoke feelings of peace or wonder. All of this suggests a world designed not just for survival, but for the kinds of experiences that nurture consciousness and inspire transcendence. If we were placed here, the placement appears to have been comprehensive, involving not just biological processes, but the configuration of an entire planetary system optimized for the development of awareness, creativity, and wisdom. Every detail, from the wavelengths of light that drive photosynthesis to the gravitational influences that stabilize our orbit, contributes to conditions that seem almost impossibly well suited for beings capable of contemplating their own existence and questioning their origins. This interpretation doesn't diminish the reality of natural processes or the evidence for evolution. Rather, it suggests that these processes themselves might have been guided or configured in ways that ensured they would produce the outcomes we observe. Natural selection, genetic variation, and environmental pressures could all function exactly as science describes while still serving larger purposes that extend beyond purely material considerations. The question becomes not whether natural processes are real, but whether they operate within frameworks that transcend random chance. If consciousness was somehow built into the fundamental structure of reality, if intelligence operates at cosmic scales we're only beginning to imagine, then the development of life on Earth might represent the unfolding of potentials that were present from the beginning, waiting for appropriate conditions to manifest. This possibility reframes our relationship with the natural world in profound ways. Instead of seeing ourselves as accidents in an indifferent universe, we begin to recognize our deep integration with planetary processes that seem almost purposefully arranged to support our existence and development. The air we breathe, the water we drink, the food we eat, all of it emerges from systems that appear designed to sustain not just biological life, but conscious beings capable of appreciating beauty, seeking truth, and creating meaning. The implications extend beyond individual existence to encompass our responsibilities as conscious participants in these larger patterns. If Earth's systems were configured to support the emergence of awareness and wisdom, then perhaps our role involves not just surviving and reproducing, but actively participating in the continued development of consciousness on this planet, and potentially beyond. This perspective transforms environmental stewardship from mere practical necessity into spiritual obligation. If we were placed within a planetary system optimized for consciousness, then our treatment of that system reflects our understanding of why we're here and what we're meant to become. The health of Earth's ecosystems becomes directly connected to the health of human consciousness and culture. It also suggests that our scientific exploration of natural processes might serve purposes beyond satisfying curiosity, or developing technology. By understanding how Earth systems function, how they're integrated, and how they support the emergence of consciousness, we might be participating in a form of cosmic self-awareness, helping the universe understand itself through our investigations and insights. The beauty we perceive in natural processes, the sense of wonder that drives scientific inquiry, the feeling of connection we experience when we contemplate our place within larger systems, all of this might represent consciousness, recognizing the conditions that made its own emergence possible. In studying the world around us, we might be discovering not just how things work, but why they work the way they do, and what purposes they serve in the larger story of awareness developing throughout the cosmos. This recognition doesn't require belief in any particular theory of how placement might have occurred. Whether through extraterrestrial intervention, temporal manipulation, divine creativity, or cosmic processes we don't yet understand, the optimization of Earth's systems for consciousness remains a remarkable fact that transforms how we see ourselves and our world. As we sit with these possibilities, something shifts in how we experience our immediate surroundings. The room where you're listening, the air you're breathing, the light that illuminates your space, all of it becomes part of a vast, integrated system that seems almost impossibly well suited for supporting the kind of awareness that can contemplate these very questions. The oxygen in your lungs was produced by plants through photosynthetic processes calibrated to work with our particular star. The water in your body has cycled through countless systems over billions of years, purified and renewed by planetary processes that maintain precisely the conditions consciousness requires. The elements in your cells were forged in the hearts of ancient stars and distributed through cosmic processes that eventually assembled them into forms capable of self-reflection. Every breath becomes a reminder of how thoroughly integrated we are with systems that extend from the molecular to the cosmic scale. Every heartbeat connects us to rhythms that have sustained life on this planet for billions of years. Every thought participates in patterns of information, processing, that merge from arrangements of matter so precisely configured that they can contemplate their own existence and question their origins. Whether these arrangements emerge through purely natural processes or represent some form of intentional placement, their existence remains one of the most remarkable facts about our universe. And our ability to recognize and appreciate this remarkability might itself be one of the most significant aspects of whatever process brought us into being. The question of placement thus becomes not just a puzzle to be solved, but a lens through which to perceive the extraordinary nature of ordinary existence. It invites us to see ourselves not as separate from the natural world, but as expressions of its deepest potentials, consciousness emerging from arrangements of matter and energy that seem almost impossibly well suited for exactly this kind of emergence. In recognizing this integration, we begin to understand that whether we were placed here or emerged through natural processes, our existence represents something unprecedented in the known universe. We are arrangements of atoms that have become aware of themselves, capable of questioning their origins, creating beauty, seeking truth, and contemplating possibilities that extend far beyond immediate survival needs. This awareness carries with it both privilege and responsibility. If we are indeed expressions of cosmic processes that favor the development of consciousness, then how we use that consciousness matters not just for ourselves, but for the larger patterns we're part of. The choices we make, the wisdom we develop, the beauty we create, all of it might serve purposes that extend beyond individual lives to encompass the continued evolution of awareness throughout the universe. As we continue to explore these possibilities, we're not just satisfying intellectual curiosity, we're participating in what might be consciousness examining itself, trying to understand its own nature and origins. And in that participation, we might be fulfilling exactly the kind of purpose that would justify the extraordinary arrangements that made our existence possible in the first place. The story of placement, whether literal or metaphorical, ultimately becomes a story about recognition. Recognition of how remarkable our existence is, how precisely configured our world appears to be for consciousness, and how thoroughly integrated we are with processes that seem to favor the development of awareness, creativity, and wisdom. In that recognition, something profound shifts in how we relate to existence itself. The world becomes not just a stage for human activity, but a carefully prepared environment for the emergence of something unprecedented. And we become not just biological organisms struggling for survival, but participants in what might be the universe's most ambitious project. The development of consciousness capable of understanding itself and its place within the larger patterns that gave it birth. This recognition opens pathways to understanding that extend far beyond our planetary home. Because if Earth was indeed configured to support consciousness, if every system from molecular to atmospheric was somehow calibrated for our emergence, then we must ask what this suggests about the broader cosmos. Are we witnessing processes that operate on scales we've barely begun to imagine? And if so, what does that mean for consciousness itself as a phenomenon in the universe? When astronomers peer deep into space, they're looking backward through time, seeing galaxies as they existed millions or billions of years ago. What they find is a universe that seems surprisingly structured, organized in ways that permit the formation of stars, planets, and the complex chemistry that life requires. The fundamental constants of physics appear precisely tuned to allow matter to organize itself into increasingly sophisticated arrangements. But change the strength of gravity by a tiny fraction, and stars either burn out too quickly or never ignite at all. Adjust the electromagnetic force slightly, and atoms can't hold together to form molecules. Modify the nuclear forces that bind protons and neutrons, and you get a universe of pure hydrogen, or one where everything immediately collapses into black holes. Yet somehow, all these within the values fall narrow ranges that permit complexity to emerge. This fine-tuning extends to the large-scale structure of the universe itself. Galaxies form in patterns that create stable environments for star formation. Solar systems develop in configurations that can support planetary development. The distribution of elements throughout the cosmos provides exactly the materials needed for complex chemistry and eventually for life. From one perspective, this appears to be the result of what cosmologists call the anthropic principle. We observe a universe suitable for our existence because universes unsuitable for consciousness wouldn't contain observers to notice their properties. In this view, we're simply the inevitable result of being in the one possible universe where conditions happen to align correctly. But the precision required pushes against purely coincidental explanations. The margins for error are so narrow, the coordination across so many different scales so exact, that some scientists have begun to consider whether consciousness itself might be built into the fundamental structure of reality rather than being an accidental byproduct of complex arrangements. This possibility suggests that the same processes we see operating on Earth, the apparent optimization for awareness and intelligence, might be characteristic of cosmic evolution more broadly. Perhaps the universe itself tends toward consciousness, not through random accidents, but through principles we don't yet understand that guide matter and energy toward increasingly sophisticated forms of organization. If this is true, then our placement on Earth represents not an isolated event, but part of a much larger pattern. Consciousness might be emerging throughout the cosmos wherever conditions permit, each instance contributing to what could be described as the universe awakening to itself through countless individual awareness centers scattered across space and time. This interpretation would explain why the development of intelligence seems to follow similar patterns wherever we find it. The emergence of language, art, mathematics, and spiritual insight might represent universal stages in the development of consciousness, steps that awareness naturally takes as it becomes more sophisticated and self-reflective. It would also suggest that our search for extraterrestrial intelligence might eventually succeed, not because we happen to share the galaxy with other random accidents, but because consciousness represents a fundamental tendency of cosmic evolution. Other worlds with suitable conditions might naturally give rise to beings asking the same questions we ask, wondering about their origins and seeking to understand their place in the larger patterns that brought them into existence. But this raises profound questions about the nature of individual consciousness and its relationship to whatever larger processes might be operating. If awareness is indeed a cosmic phenomenon, if consciousness emerges naturally from arrangements of matter and energy under appropriate conditions, then what does that mean for the subjective experience of being aware? Each of us experiences consciousness as something intensely personal, private, and individual. The inner world of thoughts, feelings, memories, and perceptions seems to belong uniquely to the particular arrangement of neural networks that generates it. Yet this individual awareness might simultaneously be participating in patterns that extend far beyond any single mind, or even any single species. Consider how human consciousness operates collectively. Individual minds can share ideas, build knowledge across generations, and create cultural systems that preserve insights across centuries or millennia. Science, art, philosophy, and spiritual wisdom all represent forms of collective intelligence that transcend what any individual mind could achieve alone. This collective dimension of consciousness might extend beyond human culture to encompass forms of awareness we haven't yet recognized. Perhaps the biosphere itself represents a kind of planetary intelligence, the integrated result of countless individual organisms interacting in ways that create emergent properties at larger scales. Perhaps solar systems, galaxies, or even the universe as a whole exhibit forms of organization that constitute types of consciousness. We lack the conceptual frameworks to recognize if placement occurred, it might have involved not just the introduction of individual minds, but the seeding of patterns that would eventually contribute to these larger forms of awareness. Each conscious being might serve simultaneously as an individual center of experience and as a component in more comprehensive systems of intelligence that operate at scales we can barely imagine. This possibility reframes questions about purpose and meaning in profound ways. In steer comma, we might need of asking why individual consciousness exists, to ask what role individual awareness plays in the development of consciousness at cosmic scales. Our thoughts, insights, and creative expressions might contribute to forms of intelligence that encompass entire worlds, or stellar regions, or dimensional frameworks beyond our current understanding. The implications for how we understand death and continuity become particularly intriguing from this perspective. If individual consciousness participates in larger patterns that transcend biological existence, then the end of any particular arrangement of neural networks might not represent the complete cessation of the awareness it supported. Instead, it might involve the integration of individual insights and experiences into more comprehensive forms of intelligence. This doesn't necessarily require belief in personal survival after death, but it does suggest that consciousness might have dimensions that extend beyond the boundaries of individual brains and bodies. The ideas we develop, the beauty we create, the love we share, the wisdom we accumulate. All of it might contribute to patterns of awareness that continue developing long after the biological systems that generated them have ceased to function. Ancient spiritual traditions often describe individual consciousness as both separate and unified, distinct centers of awareness that nonetheless participate in larger wholes. Modern physics has begun to explore similar ideas through concepts like quantum entanglement, which suggests that particles can remain connected across vast distances in ways that transcend ordinary space and time. Perhaps consciousness operates according to principles that similarly transcend the apparent boundaries between individual minds. Perhaps awareness itself represents a field or dimension of reality that individual brains access rather than generate, like radios tuning into signals that exist independently of any particular receiver. This interpretation would explain why certain insights, creative breakthroughs, and spiritual realizations seem to emerge simultaneously in multiple individuals who have no direct contact with each other. Throughout history, major discoveries and artistic innovations often appear in several places at once, as if consciousness itself were ready for these developments, regardless of which particular minds happen to receive them first. It would also explain why human beings across all cultures seem to share certain fundamental intuitions about meaning, beauty, and transcendence, despite vastly different environmental and cultural conditions. Perhaps these universal aspects of human experience reflect our participation in patterns of awareness that extend far beyond individual psychology or cultural conditioning. The development of science itself might represent consciousness exploring its own nature through systematic investigation of the conditions that made its emergence possible. When we study physics, chemistry, biology, and psychology, we're not just accumulating information about external reality. We're participating in awareness examining itself, trying to understand how consciousness arises from arrangements of matter and energy, and what purposes it might serve in the larger cosmic context. The beauty we find in scientific discoveries, the sense of wonder that drives exploration, the feeling of recognition when we encounter elegant mathematical relationships or profound natural principles. All of this might represent consciousness, recognizing aspects of its own deeper nature reflected in the structures and processes of the physical world. Artistic expression could serve similar functions, allowing consciousness to explore dimensions of experience that can't be captured through purely analytical approaches. Music, visual arts, poetry, and storytelling might represent ways that awareness investigates its own possibilities, testing different configurations of meaning and beauty to discover what kinds of experience are possible for beings like ourselves. Spiritual practices and philosophical inquiry might serve as methods for consciousness to examine its relationship to the larger patterns it participates in. Meditation, prayer, contemplation, and ethical reflection could be ways that individual awareness aligns itself with cosmic processes that favor the development of wisdom, compassion, and understanding. If placement occurred, perhaps its ultimate purpose was to create conditions where consciousness could eventually recognize its own nature and begin participating consciously in whatever larger intelligence governs the development of awareness throughout the universe. Rather than remaining unconscious components in cosmic processes, we might be intended to become conscious participants, aware of our roles, and able to contribute deliberately to the continued evolution of intelligence. This possibility transforms how we understand responsibility and choice. Instead of being merely biological organisms driven by survival instincts and cultural conditioning, we might be expressions of cosmic consciousness, exploring what's possible when awareness becomes sufficiently sophisticated to recognize itself and choose its own direction of development. The decisions we make about how to use our minds, what kinds of knowledge to pursue, what forms of beauty to create, what ethical principles to embody, all of this might have implications that extend far beyond our individual lives or even our species' survival. We might be participating in the universe's exploration of its own potentials, helping determine what kinds of awareness and intelligence are possible under the conditions that exist in our corner of space and time. This perspective doesn't diminish human agency or reduce individual significance. Instead, it suggests that every conscious choice participates in patterns of meaning that extend across scales from the personal to the cosmic. What we think, feel, and do matters not just for ourselves, but for the continued development of consciousness throughout the universe. The question of whether we were placed here thus becomes inseparable from questions about what we're meant to become. If consciousness represents a cosmic phenomenon rather than an isolated accident, then our development as aware, creative, wise beings might serve purposes that we're only beginning to glimpse. Perhaps our role involves preparing the foundations for forms of intelligence that will eventually transcend current limitations of space, time, and individual identity. Perhaps we're meant to seed consciousness throughout our local region of the galaxy, extending awareness to other worlds and other forms of life. Perhaps our purpose involves developing new forms of beauty, wisdom, and understanding that contribute to the universe's exploration of its own possibilities. Or perhaps our significance lies not in any grand cosmic mission, but in the simple fact of our existence as centers of awareness, capable of recognizing beauty, seeking truth, creating meaning, and contemplating the mystery of our own being. Perhaps consciousness itself is so remarkable, so unprecedented in the known universe, that its mere existence justifies whatever processes brought it into being. The question of placement ultimately returns us to the immediate reality of awareness itself. Here we are. Arrangements of atoms that have somehow become conscious, capable of questioning our origins and contemplating possibilities that extend far beyond the material conditions that gave us birth. Whether this consciousness emerged through purely natural processes or represents some form of intentional seeding, its existence remains one of the most extraordinary facts about our universe. And in recognizing this extraordinariness, we begin to understand that every moment of awareness represents something unprecedented. The simple act of perceiving, thinking, feeling, and questioning participates in patterns that may extend throughout the cosmos, connecting our individual consciousness to intelligence operating at scales we can barely imagine. This recognition doesn't provide definitive answers about how or why we came to be here, but it does transform how we relate to the mystery of existence itself. Instead of seeing consciousness as a problem to be solved or explained away, we begin to appreciate it as a phenomenon so remarkable that it reframes everything else we think we know about reality. In that appreciation, the question of placement becomes less important than the question of participation. Whether we were deliberately introduced to this world or emerged through natural processes, we're here now, aware and questioning. And in that awareness and questioning, we might be fulfilling exactly the kind of purpose that would justify the extraordinary arrangements that made our existence possible. The cosmos has somehow produced beings capable of contemplating their own place within it. Stars have died to create the elements in our bodies. Billions of years of planetary evolution have created the conditions for our emergence. And now consciousness looks back through time and space, trying to understand the processes that brought it into being. Whether this represents the unfolding of cosmic intelligence or the most remarkable accident in the known universe, it remains a phenomenon worthy of wonder, gratitude, and the kind of careful attention that might help us understand not just where we came from, but what we're meant to become. As we continue to explore these possibilities, we're not just satisfying curiosity about our origins, we're participating in consciousness examining itself, trying to understand its own nature and potential. And in that participation, we might be fulfilling the deepest purpose consciousness can serve, becoming aware of awareness itself and contributing to whatever larger intelligence may be developing throughout the patterns of space and time. In contemplating the vastness of consciousness and its cosmic implications, we find ourselves drawn towards something more immediate, more tangible. Because while the universe may harbor intelligence at scales we can barely fathom, there remains the quiet mystery of what consciousness actually feels like from the inside, the texture of awareness itself, the weight of thoughts as they form, the strange intimacy of being someone rather than no one at all. When you pause right now and simply notice that you're noticing, something remarkable becomes apparent. There's an observer present, a witness to whatever thoughts and sensations arise. This observer doesn't seem to be located anywhere specific within your body, yet it's unmistakably there, aware and attentive. It's the part of you that remains constant while everything else changes, the still center around which memories, emotions, and perceptions continuously flow. This witnessing awareness possesses qualities that seem almost impossible from a purely materialistic perspective. It appears to exist outside of time, observing the flow of thoughts without being caught up in their content. It can watch pain without becoming pain, notice fear without being consumed by fear, observe joy without losing itself in excitement. There's a spaciousness to this awareness, a capacity that seems unlimited, despite arising from arrangements of matter that are obviously finite. The mystery deepens when you consider how this observer relates to the content of consciousness. Thoughts appear within awareness like bubbles rising in still water. They form, persist for a moment, and then dissolve. Yet the awareness in which they arise remains unchanged. Where do these thoughts come from? They don't seem to be produced by conscious effort, yet they're intimately connected to the mind that experiences them. Even more puzzling is the relationship between this observing awareness and the sense of personal identity. The voice in your head that comments on experience, the narrator that weaves events into stories, the personality that responds to circumstances with habitual patterns. All of this seems to be observed by something deeper, something that remains untouched by the dramas of personal existence. This suggests that consciousness might have layers or dimensions that extend beyond what we typically identify as ourselves. The everyday sense of being a separate individual with a continuous personal history might represent just one level of a more comprehensive awareness that includes but transcends individual identity. Ancient contemplatives discovered this through direct investigation of consciousness itself. Rather than studying awareness through external observation, they turned attention inward, examining the nature of the observer directly. What they found consistently challenged conventional assumptions about the boundaries and limitations of individual consciousness. Through sustained attention to the arising and passing of mental phenomena, practitioners discovered that thoughts, emotions, and perceptions appear to emerge from a source that can't be located or grasped. This source seems to be simultaneously intimate and impersonal, uniquely individual yet somehow universal. It's as if each mind provides access to awareness that extends far beyond the apparent boundaries of brain and body. Modern neuroscience has begun to explore similar territory through studies of meditation, psychedelic experiences, and altered states of consciousness. Researchers find that when ordinary thinking patterns are disrupted or suspended, people consistently report experiences of expanded awareness that feel more fundamental than normal waking consciousness. These states often involve a sense of unity or interconnectedness that transcends the usual boundaries between self and world. Such experiences suggest that individual consciousness might be more like a wave on an ocean than a separate entity. Each wave has its own characteristics, its own temporary form, yet it's never actually separate from the water that creates it. Similarly, individual awareness might represent temporary expressions of a more comprehensive intelligence that connects all conscious beings at levels we don't normally recognize. This possibility would explain many puzzling aspects of consciousness that conventional neuroscience struggles to address. Why do creative insights often appear spontaneously, as if downloaded from somewhere beyond individual thinking? Why do people separated by vast distances sometimes develop identical ideas simultaneously? Why do certain forms of knowledge seem to be remembered rather than learned? If consciousness operates according to principles that transcend the apparent boundaries between individual minds, then the development of human awareness might involve not just the evolution of more sophisticated brains, but the activation of capacities that connect us to larger patterns of intelligence. Our thoughts and insights might participate in networks of meaning that extend far beyond what any individual mind could generate alone. Language provides compelling evidence for this interconnected nature of consciousness. When you speak, words arise effortlessly from somewhere beyond conscious control. You don't have to think about how to arrange sounds into meaningful patterns, or how to access the vast vocabulary stored somewhere in memory. The capacity for linguistic expression seems to emerge from intelligence that operates below the threshold of ordinary awareness. Even more remarkably, language allows minds to merge temporarily through communication. When you truly understand what someone else is saying, their thoughts become present in your awareness in ways that blur the boundaries between separate minds. Ideas can be shared so completely that they become indistinguishable from your own insights, suggesting that consciousness might be far more fluid and interconnected than our usual experience suggests. The phenomenon of empathy reveals similar transcendence of individual boundaries. When you deeply feel another person's pain or joy, something in your awareness resonates with their experience in ways that seem to bypass normal sensory channels. This emotional attunement suggests that consciousness might include capacities for direct connection that don't depend on external communication. Collective intelligence emerges when groups of people align their awareness toward common goals. Or insights. Teams sometimes achieve understanding that exceeds what any individual member could have reached alone. Scientific breakthroughs often result from collaborative investigation, where insights emerge from the interaction between minds rather than from isolated thinking. Artistic collaborations can produce beauty that transcends what individual creativity might have generated. These collective dimensions of consciousness suggest that individual awareness might serve functions that extend beyond personal survival and satisfaction. Our thoughts, insights, and creative expressions might contribute to larger patterns of intelligence that operate at scales we rarely consider. The quality of our individual consciousness might affect not just our personal experience, but the collective awareness of our communities, our species, and perhaps even larger systems we're only beginning to recognize. This understanding transforms how we approach the development of consciousness itself. Instead of seeing awareness as a fixed capacity determined by genetic inheritance and early conditioning, we begin to recognize it as something that can be cultivated, refined, and expanded through appropriate practices and attention. Meditation traditions have developed sophisticated technologies for investigating and transforming consciousness directly. Through sustained attention to the arising and passing of mental phenomena, practitioners discover capacities for awareness that far exceed ordinary waking consciousness. These include states of profound stillness, where thought activity subsides entirely, experiences of expanded identity that encompass vast ranges of space and time, and insights into the nature of reality that transform how existence itself is understood. Such practices suggest that the consciousness we normally experience represents just a fraction of our actual potential for awareness. Much like physical fitness can be developed through appropriate exercise, the capacity for clear, stable, compassionate awareness can be enhanced through training methods that have been refined over thousands of years. The implications extend beyond individual development to encompass collective transformation. If consciousness is indeed interconnected at levels we don't normally recognize, then the quality of individual awareness directly influences the collective intelligence of larger systems. Personal practices that cultivate wisdom, compassion, and clarity might serve not just individual flourishing, but the evolution of consciousness at social and potentially cosmic scales. This possibility reframes questions about personal responsibility and social engagement. Instead of seeing individual development and collective welfare as separate concerns, we begin. The cultivation of individual consciousness becomes to recognize them as aspects of the same process, a form of service to the larger patterns of intelligence we participate in, while engagement with collective challenges becomes a means for developing wisdom and compassion. The integration of contemplative practices with scientific investigation opens new possibilities for understanding consciousness that neither approach could achieve alone. Subjective exploration of awareness provides insights into the nature of experience that can't be captured through external observation. While scientific methods offer ways to test and refine contemplative discoveries through rigorous investigation, this collaboration between inner and outer exploration might represent consciousness examining itself from multiple perspectives simultaneously. Through contemplative practice, awareness investigates its own nature directly. Through scientific research, consciousness studies itself through the tools and methods it has developed for understanding external reality. The convergence of these approaches could eventually produce comprehensive understanding of awareness that encompasses both subjective and objective dimensions. Such understanding might reveal that the question of whether we were placed here is inseparable from questions about the nature of consciousness itself. If awareness represents a fundamental aspect of reality, rather than an accidental byproduct of complex neural activity, then the emergence of conscious beings anywhere in the universe becomes less surprising and more inevitable. Perhaps consciousness doesn't arise from matter, but rather matter arises within consciousness, organizing itself into forms capable of recognizing and exploring their own nature. In this view, the development of intelligent life represents the universe awakening to itself through countless individual centers of awareness scattered across space and time. This interpretation would suggest that our placement on Earth, whether through natural processes or intelligent design, serves the cosmic function of creating conditions where consciousness can examine and develop itself. Every moment of clear awareness, every insight into the nature of experience, every expression of wisdom or compassion, contributes to what might be described as the universe coming to understand its own deepest nature. The beauty of this possibility lies not in providing definitive answers about our origins, but in revealing the extraordinary significance of consciousness itself. Whether we emerged through blind evolutionary processes or represent expressions of cosmic intelligence, our capacity for awareness remains remarkable beyond measure. In recognizing this remarkableness, we begin to appreciate that every moment of conscious experience represents something unprecedented in the known universe. The simple fact that you're aware right now, capable of questioning and wondering and recognizing beauty, participates in patterns that may extend throughout the cosmos, connecting your individual consciousness to intelligence operating at scales beyond current imagination. This awareness transforms the quality of immediate experience. The room where you're listening becomes part of a vast field of consciousness exploring itself. Your breathing participates in rhythms that connect you to planetary processes. Billions of years old, your thoughts arise within awareness that might extend far beyond the boundaries of brain and body. Even uncertainty becomes a form of participation in cosmic intelligence. The questions you're entertaining right now, the wonder you might be feeling, the sense of mystery that draws you into deeper contemplation, all of this represents consciousness examining its own nature and possibilities. Perhaps this is why the question of placement feels so compelling. It's not just curiosity about historical events, but consciousness recognizing something profound about its own nature. In wondering whether we were intentionally placed here, awareness is investigating whether its own existence serves purposes that extend beyond individual survival and satisfaction. The answer might matter less than the questioning itself. In asking these questions, consciousness demonstrates capabilities that seem almost impossibly sophisticated for arrangements of matter and energy. The very fact that we can contemplate cosmic intelligence, investigate the nature of awareness, and wonder about our place in larger patterns might represent exactly the kind of achievement that would justify whatever processes brought consciousness into existence in the first place. As we continue exploring these mysteries, we're not just satisfying intellectual curiosity. We're participating in consciousness examining itself, contributing to whatever larger intelligence might be developing throughout the patterns of space and time. And in that participation, we might be fulfilling the deepest purpose awareness can serve, becoming conscious of consciousness itself and helping determine what forms intelligence might take as it continues evolving throughout the cosmos. The exploration continues to unfold, each question opening new possibilities. each insight revealing greater depths of mystery. Dot. And perhaps that's exactly as it should be. Consciousness forever discovering new aspects of its own nature, forever questioning, forever wondering, forever participating in the extraordinary fact of its own existence. In this ongoing discovery, the question of whether we were placed here becomes less important than recognizing what we've become through whatever process brought us into being. We, our consciousness awakening to itself, intelligence investigating its own nature, awareness exploring the mystery of its own existence. And in that exploration, we might be participating in something far more significant than we usually dare to imagine. Through all of our questioning and contemplating, through all the mysteries we've traced and possibilities we've entertained, something else begins to emerge. But a different way answers exactly of holding the questions themselves. Because perhaps the most profound realization isn't about whether we were placed here, but about what happens when consciousness becomes aware of its own extraordinary nature. When you really sit with the implications of what we've been exploring, something shifts in the quality of ordinary experience. The simple act of breathing becomes a participation in atmospheric cycles that have sustained life for billions of years. The beating of your heart connects you to rhythms that echo throughout living systems across the planet. Even the thoughts arising in your mind right now participate in patterns of intelligence that might extend far beyond individual awareness. This shift in perspective doesn't require belief in any particular theory about our origins. Whether we emerge through natural processes or represent some form of cosmic seeding, the fact remains that we exist as conscious beings capable of contemplating our own existence. And that capacity itself transforms everything it touches. Consider how different the world appears when viewed through eyes that recognize their own improbability. Every tree becomes a testament to the precise calibration of atmospheric chemistry. Every sunset reveals electromagnetic frequencies perfectly matched to visual systems that somehow learn to perceive beauty in organized light. Every human face carries evidence of neural architectures sophisticated enough to generate inner worlds of memory, imagination, and meaning. The recognition of our own remarkableness ripples outward through every aspect of experience. Relationships deepen when we recognize that consciousness is meeting consciousness, that the awareness looking through another person's eyes shares something fundamental with the awareness that witnesses our own thoughts and perceptions. Love becomes less about possessing or being possessed, and more about two expressions of cosmic intelligence recognizing themselves in each other. Art and music reveal new dimensions when understood as consciousness, exploring its own aesthetic possibilities. Every painting becomes an investigation of how awareness responds to color, form, and composition. Every melody represents the universe discovering what kinds of organized vibration create meaning and emotion in beings like ourselves. The drive to create emerges not from biological necessity, but from consciousness delighting in its own capacity for beauty. Even science transforms from mere information gathering into a form of cosmic self-examination. When we study the behavior of atoms, we're participating in the universe investigating its own fundamental structure. When we map the neural correlates of consciousness, we're engaging in awareness studying itself through the very mechanisms that make such study possible. Every discovery becomes a moment of recognition, intelligence meeting itself reflected in the patterns of physical reality. This perspective naturally leads to questions about responsibility and purpose. If consciousness represents something unprecedented in the known universe, if our existence participates in patterns that might extend across cosmic scales, then how we use our awareness begins to feel significant in ways we might not have previously considered. The thoughts we choose to cultivate, the emotions we allow to dominate our inner landscape, the kinds of beauty we create and wisdom we develop. All of this might contribute to larger patterns of intelligence in ways we're only beginning to glimpse. Personal development becomes a form of cosmic service, while service to others becomes a means of participating consciously in the evolution of awareness itself. This doesn't mean we need to carry the weight of cosmic responsibility on our shoulders, rather, it suggests that consciousness naturally tends toward what serves its own deepest flourishing. Wisdom, compassion, creativity, and beauty aren't arbitrary human values, but expressions of intelligence recognizing what supports its own continued development and expression. The contemplative traditions discovered this through direct investigation of consciousness itself. When awareness examines its own nature without the filters of conceptual thinking, it consistently discovers qualities like peace, love, and understanding that seem to be inherent rather than constructed. These aren't emotions that come and go, but fundamental characteristics of consciousness itself when it recognizes its own nature clearly. Modern research in positive psychology and neuroscience has begun to confirm these ancient insights through external investigation. Studies consistently show that practices cultivating qualities and present like gratitude, compass moment awareness, don't just improve individual well-being, but enhance cognitive function, strengthen immune systems, and improve social relationships. It's as if consciousness naturally moves toward configurations that support both individual flourishing and collective harmony. This convergence between contemplative wisdom and scientific discovery suggests that consciousness might be inherently oriented toward what we could call evolutionary development. Not evolution in the biological sense of random mutation and natural selection, but conscious evolution guided by awareness itself, recognizing and choosing directions that support its own deepest expression. If this is true, then the question of whether we were placed here takes on new dimensions. Perhaps placement doesn't require external intervention by other intelligences. Perhaps consciousness itself represents a cosmic force that naturally guides matter and energy toward arrangements capable of supporting awareness, creativity, and wisdom. In this view, the fine-tuning of physical constants, the emergence of life on Earth, and the development of human intelligence all represent consciousness organizing reality to support its own manifestation and expression. We become not just accidental byproducts of cosmic processes, but expressions of the universe's inherent tendency towards self-awareness. This interpretation would explain why the development of consciousness seems to follow similar patterns wherever we find evidence of it. The emergence of language, art, mathematics, and spiritual insight might represent universal stages in the development of awareness, steps that consciousness naturally takes as it becomes more sophisticated and self-reflective. It would also suggest that our future development isn't predetermined by external forces, but represents choices consciousness makes about its own continued evolution. The of beauty we create, the depth kinds of beings we become, the forms of wisdom we cultivate, all of this participates in consciousness exploring its own possibilities and determining what kinds of awareness are possible under the conditions that exist in our corner of space and time. This perspective transforms how we understand both individual choices and collective challenges. Personal decisions about how to use our minds and hearts become participation in cosmic intelligence, exploring its own potential. Social and environmental problems become opportunities for consciousness to develop new forms of wisdom and cooperation that serve its own long-term flourishing. The climate crisis, for instance, might represent consciousness confronting the consequences of intelligence that developed technological power before developing the wisdom to use it responsibly. The solution requires not just new technologies, but new levels of awareness that can hold both individual needs and planetary well-being in a larger perspective that serves the whole. Similarly, social conflicts might represent consciousness exploring different possibilities for how intelligent beings can organize themselves collectively. Each culture, each political system, each attempt at creating just and sustainable societies contributes to awareness, discovering what forms of organization support the flourishing of intelligence over long periods of time. Even personal struggles take on new meaning from this perspective. Every challenge becomes an opportunity for consciousness to develop new capacities for resilience, wisdom, and compassion. Every difficulty faced and worked through skillfully contributes to the universe's exploration of what awareness can accomplish when it meets obstacles with clarity and creativity, rather than reactivity and fear. This doesn't diminish the reality of suffering or suggest that all difficulties serve beneficial purposes. Rather, it points toward consciousness having inherent capacities for transformation that can find meaning and growth even in the midst of challenging circumstances. The same intelligence that recognizes beauty in organized light and meaning in structured sound can discover wisdom in the midst of uncertainty and love in the face of loss. The implications extend beyond individual experience to encompass questions about death and continuity. If consciousness represents a fundamental aspect of reality rather than a byproduct of neural activity, then the end of biological life might not represent the complete cessation of awareness, but rather it expresses itself. This possibility doesn't transition in the forms through which consciousness require belief in personal survival after it exclude it either. Rather, it death. Though it doesn't suggest that the awareness, wisdom, and love developed during individual lifetimes might continue to influence the larger patterns of intelligence that consciousness represents. The beauty created, the wisdom gained, the connections formed, all become part of the ongoing development of cosmic awareness. Ancient spiritual traditions often describe individual consciousness as both temporary and eternal, finite expressions of infinite awareness that return to their source while contributing their unique perspectives to the whole. Modern physics has begun to explore similar concepts through ideas like information conservation, which suggests that the patterns that constitute complex systems might persist even after the material substrates that support them have changed. Perhaps consciousness operates according to principles that similarly transcend the apparent boundaries between individual minds and between life and death. The insights we develop, the love we share, the beauty we create, might all contribute to patterns of awareness that continue evolving long after the biological systems that generated them have returned to the elements from which they arose. This interpretation would explain why human beings everywhere seem drawn to create something that outlasts individual existence. Art, literature, music, architecture, scientific discoveries, acts of service and love all represent attempts to contribute something meaningful to the larger flow of consciousness through time. We intuitively recognize that while individual awareness might be temporary, what consciousness accomplishes through us can participate in patterns that extend far beyond personal lifespans. The question of placement thus becomes inseparable from questions about participation. Whether we were deliberately introduced to this world or emerge through natural processes, we're here now as expressions of cosmic intelligence exploring its own nature and possibilities. How we use this opportunity, what we contribute to the ongoing development of awareness, becomes the most significant aspect of our existence. This recognition brings us full circle to where we began, but with a transformed understanding of what it means to wonder about our origins. The question, what if we were placed here, reveals itself to be consciousness investigating its own nature, awareness examining the conditions that support its emergence and development. In asking this question, we're not just satisfying curiosity about historical events, but participating in intelligence examining itself, contributing to whatever larger patterns of cosmic awareness we're part of. The very capacity to wonder, to question, to imagine possibilities beyond immediate experience might represent exactly the kind of achievement that would justify whatever processes brought consciousness into existence. And perhaps that's the most profound realization of all. Not that we have definitive answers about whether we were placed here, but that we exist as beings capable of asking such questions in the first place. The simple fact that consciousness can contemplate its own origins, investigate its own nature, and wonder about its place in cosmic patterns represents something so extraordinary that it transforms how we understand existence itself. Whether we emerge through blind evolutionary processes or represent expressions of cosmic intelligence, our capacity for awareness remains remarkable beyond measure. We are arrangements of atoms that have somehow become conscious of themselves, matter that has organized itself into forms capable of recognizing beauty, seeking truth, creating meaning, and contemplating the mystery of their own existence. In recognizing this extraordinariness, we begin to appreciate that every moment of conscious experience represents something unprecedented. The thoughts arising in your mind right now, the awareness that witnesses those thoughts, the capacity to feel wonder or curiosity or peace. All of this participates in patterns that may extend throughout the cosmos, connecting individual consciousness to intelligence operating at scales we can barely imagine. This awareness doesn't provide easy answers or eliminate mystery. Instead, it deepens our appreciation for mystery itself as something inherent to consciousness, rather than a problem to be solved. The questions we've been exploring together don't demand resolution, but rather invite ongoing investigation, continuous discovery, perpetual wonder. And perhaps that perpetual questioning represents consciousness, fulfilling its deepest nature. Not by arriving at final answers, but by remaining forever curious, forever open, forever willing to entertain possibilities that stretch beyond current understanding. In that openness, we might be expressing exactly what consciousness is designed to do, remaining alert to mystery while participating fully in whatever larger intelligence we're part of. The question of placement thus becomes less important than the question of presence. Here we are, aware and questioning, capable of wonder and creativity and love. Whether we were deliberately placed or naturally emerged, we exist now as expressions of cosmic intelligence exploring its own possibilities. And in that exploration, we might be fulfilling the deepest purpose consciousness can serve, participating in the universe coming to know itself through our individual and collective awareness. As we rest with these possibilities, something settles into a deeper recognition. The question that brought us together tonight doesn't require resolution, but rather ongoing relationship, like a dear friend whose presence enriches our understanding even when they remain mysterious. The question, what if we were placed here, continues to invite us into deeper appreciation for the extraordinary fact of our existence. And in that appreciation, we find ourselves not lost in cosmic speculation, but more fully present to the immediate miracle of being aware at all. The consciousness that can contemplate placement is itself the most remarkable phenomenon we encounter, worthy of wonder, gratitude, and the kind of careful attention that honors both its mystery and its presence. Whether we were placed here or emerged naturally, we are here now. And in that simple fact lies all the meaning and purpose consciousness could ever need. And maybe that's where we find ourselves now. Not at the end of questioning, but at the beginning of a different kind of relationship with mystery itself. Because when you've spent time considering the possibility that consciousness might be more than an accident, that our existence might serve purposes beyond what we typically imagine, something shifts in how you move through ordinary moments. The coffee you drink tomorrow morning becomes part of a cycle that connects you to soil, rain, and sunlight in ways that stretch back through geological time. The conversation you have with a friend carries echoes of language capacities that emerged with startling suddenness in our species' development. Even the simple act of falling asleep participates in rhythms of consciousness that we still barely understand. Daily transitions between different states of awareness that remain as mysterious as they are universal. This isn't about believing any particular theory of how we came to be here. It's about recognizing that regardless of the mechanisms involved, our existence represents something unprecedented in the known universe. We are matter that has somehow learned to wonder about itself, arrangements of atoms that can contemplate beauty, create meaning, and experience love. So as we reach the end of tonight's journey together, perhaps what matters most isn't whether we've found definitive answers about our placement, but whether we've allowed ourselves to truly see the extraordinary nature of what we already are. Conscious beings capable of questioning our own existence, creating beauty from nothing, and recognizing meaning in the vast patterns that surround us. Whether we were placed here by cosmic gardeners, future versions of ourselves, or the universe's own tendency toward awareness, we are here now, participating in something unprecedented. And maybe that participation itself, this very capacity to wonder and explore these questions together, is exactly the kind of purpose that would justify whatever remarkable processes brought consciousness into being in the first place.